Hello, welcome again. Yes, my name is Oskar. I work as a mobile architect and team lead in Software Mind. Um, and today I'm gonna talk about UI test. Um, so, um, let's start with some basics. How many of you do unit tests in your projects? Okay, looks good. So we have a test pyramid. There is a lot of images like this in the internet. Sometimes they are a bit different. Sometimes we can put something in the middle. But what is important, in the base, we have our unit tests. So it's a type of test we should have the most in our project because they are fast, they are easy to run. We can test everything in the isolation. So it's pretty important to start with this step. Second block is the integration test. So it tests the integration between some modules. So like the unit test, there's only one thing, one class, one method, whatever. The integration checks if two components, two modules works together. In unit test, we often use mocks. We always use mocks. In the integration, it depends. We can do UI test with mocks, but we can also do contract testing. Does anyone do contract test with backend? This is an interesting topic. So there is a tool also called backend, and it allows us to test the contract. So if you are interested, we can talk about that later. And at the top of the pyramid, like almost on the top, we have end-to-end tests. So again, in case of mobile, we can say it's UI test, but with the real backend. So in the middle, we can use some mocks for our UI tests, but with end-to-end testing, we should it. And at the very top, we have exploratory tests, QA, so a few manual tests. So the idea is, if we look from bottom to top, we should have more unit tests than integration tests, more integration tests than end-to-end, and of course, more end-to-end than manual tests. That's the idea. So, probably everyone knows what that means. Is it bad? Is it good? I don't know. Well, maybe it's bad because we need to start thinking what is wrong. We probably introduce a bug, but actually this is good because we found potential bug before it goes to the production, right? So that's why we write tests. The problem is with end-to-end tests. So the problem is if you run the test again and it works, you run again and it doesn't work. Again, works, and it works for a few days, and later it doesn't work again. That's the problem with end-to-end, because there are a few pains. So we need to deal with the real data. So for example, we need to use some test data on a test server, and for example, someone might modify a user state, someone might use the user account and change a feature flag because people need to test other things manually, developers do their stuff, and they changing the data. and sometimes our test fails because we use real data on TST server. Also, there is a delay, and sometimes server doesn't work. So if we have a delay, it means the test takes longer. It can take 10 seconds, but maybe 60 seconds. So that's also a problem. Unstable environment. So again, if we use test environment for our end-to-end tests, we can expect many issues because many teams works on the same environment, develop features, develop bugs. Yeah, that happens. Also, in my case, because currently I do mostly banking apps, we are on highly regulated market, so we have a limit of a request we can make in a given period of time. Even though it's a TST environment or dev environment, someone wants to test if the limit works. So that's why we have it also on the TST environment. And also there are edge cases. So with a given set of data, we are able to check only a specific scenario. It's difficult to test errors like 500 errors, how our app behave if we receive an error. And also you can add your own here. I can imagine that everyone has at least one pane which has with tests. So here comes the idea with a local server, but not a local server as a Docker image or as a server on a local machine somewhere, because it's again like end-to-end testing, but on a different environment. So that would be good to have a possibility to modify the data on the fly when I need a specific response from the server. And here is a tool called Swifter. It's not maintained very well during the pandemic, but it works with Swift 5, so it's quite good. And it still works. I use it in my projects. Yeah, so now I will show you a little demo. Just give me a second, please. Okay. So, how to use the Swifter, the framework I mentioned? It's actually pretty straightforward. So, there are 3 lines of code how we can initialize the server and start. That's it. The server is running on your local machine, on your Mac, on or iPhone. If we want to provide some data, we simply provide a path we want to mock, and we provide a response. In that case, it is just HTML with hello world. And when we end with our stuff, we just stop the server, and that's all. So, a bit more practice. In Software Mind, we have program, work, and enjoy, which allows you to work remotely from anywhere in the world. And we have a few localizations in Europe. On our stand, you can find Gabi. She will love to tell you more if you are interested. So I have an app with a list of destinations. Let's go through the code just to get the context. So this is a simple view with a view model, and the view model has a state. By default, state is a state when the destination are fetched from the server. So it simply renders a destination cell with an image, name of the destination, and some description. Also, we set a title for navigation view, and what is important, we set accessibility identifier for our UI test. Next one is error state. So a state when we cannot reach to the server or there is an error. And also we set accessibility identifier. And the last one is a loading state. So we just show a progress view when it is loading. A quick overview of the destination cell. So it's image and two texts. Also with the identifiers, because it makes easier to find those components in our UI tests. So I set it using destination and destination ID from the model, and then a name of the component. A quick overview of the model is ID, name, image name, and description. Pretty straightforward. And view model. So, like I said, view model has state and initializer, which takes URL and URL session as argument, so we can easily mock it in our unit test. And the thing I forgot to mention with the view, when the view is loaded, we call load content method from the view model, and it simply changes the state to loading. Then we construct a URL with a path destination, then URL request. It's not that fancy network layer that we saw yesterday, but it's just an example. So when we have success, we decode the response and change the state. If there is any error, we change the state to error and show it on the UI. Okay, so that's about the app. Let's go and write some end-to-end tests. We shouldn't begin with this because by the like we have on the pyramid, we should start with the integration test, right? We should have more integration tests than end-to-end. But let's feel the pain. Okay, so at the beginning, we create a URL to reach our server, and gateway is a simple wrapper for the network layer in our test module, and later we just call get destination method. So under the hood, it looks like this. Nothing specific really. Again, URL session, destination path, and URL request. Then we decode the response. Also, there is a model which is almost the same. Okay, and now we can launch our application. Not really application. The class which is here, launch launcher for our application. So if you ever launch a UI test, you probably notice that there is a second app, the one without the icon. So in fact, this app launch our app find all elements we need, and then we can test it. So there is a launch method. It runs the app, and then we look for the list for the table. There is only one, so we look for the first match, and we wait 1 second for the list to appear. If it appears, it means that there are cells, and we check if we have exactly the same number of cells like we have in our response from the server, and then we verify all data for each cell. So we check image view, we check the label for image view because it's an image name from the main bundle. We verify a title and the description. We use, of course, accessibility identifiers to find our cells. Okay, let's see it in action. Let's run the test and see what happens. Yeah, pretty quick, right? So, the problem begins if we have a delay on our server, but we wait only 1 second for element to appear. If I run the test again, and now we have a little delay, yeah, and the test failed. It took 5 seconds. Of course, we can increase the timeout, but let's say it can be even 60 seconds, so it takes longer and longer and longer. And similarly, even without the delay, if we change the response for bot request, for example, and we run a test, it will fail again. But it takes time because it goes over the loop and looking for all elements. So it takes some time, which costs us money. Yeah, it fails. So, how to use the local server then? Let's go back to normal with this, and let's see what we can do with the mock server, with the Swifter. First of all, we need to set up our server. So on the before we start each test, we start our server, and after the test ends, we stop the server. So we have a new instance for every test. Not really a new instance because the instance is only one, but we start and stop the server. Okay. Now, because we need to mock some data, so I'm creating an example of the response I would like to receive from the server, and later I use JSON encoder and JSON serialization to pass it to the server, to the destination path. I used JSON encoder, but you can also bundle JSON files in your project and just use the data and pass it to the Swifter. Okay, and here we go again. It looks quite similar. I mean, we run the app, we look for the list, then we verify all cells. So it's exactly the same code we have in the previous function, and all of us know that we can just refactor this, put to another function, class, module, whatever you want, whatever suits your architecture, and we can have different test suites with the same test but different expectations. So it looks like this is it. I always wanted to say that. There's one more thing. We need somehow to inject the URL, the localhost, to our app, because for now our app doesn't know that we want to use a local server or the real server. So if you remember, the destination list view model takes a URL as an argument, and by default it's work@enjoy.softwaremind.com. But now we need to find a way to pass it from our tests. So there are two ways, at least two ways I know. One is launch argument. So we can pass an array of strings, array of arguments, and we can read it in the app. Or we can use launch environment property, which is quite similar, but it's just a string. And then we can check it in our app. I did it in the mind fail, but you can do it whatever it suits for you. I also added a debug check because we don't want someone to inject some argument somehow and use the local host, right? We know from the previous speech that the security is quite important. So if we have an argument to use the local server, we call localhost, otherwise we use the remote server. And let's do the demo again. I will run the test for mock. As you probably saw, I can set a breakpoint here. On the list appears only the cell from my mock, so we don't have the response from the remote server. And the test ends with success. That's pretty cool. And there's one more thing, again. So, as I said, now we have a possibility to test errors, to test different use cases. We don't need to take care of many user data and stuff like this. So if I want to check the behavior of the app for an error, I can just pass a bad request response for the destination request, and then launch the app with the proper argument. And now I'm waiting for the error text to appear. When it appears, I just check the label if it works as expected. So let's run it. Yeah, it works. So now we can run all tests, end-to-end tests, and test with the mock server, and all tests should pass. because they are independent. And that's right, all green. Okay, that's for the demo.